Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today's guest is Stefanie Michele, a binge eating recovery coach with a powerful mix of personal experience and professional training. As an intuitive eating counselor, integrative nutrition health coach, somatic experiencing therapist, and occupational therapist, Stefanie helps people break free from binge eating and regulate their nervous systems so they can live more peaceful, authentic lives. During her own experience trapped in the binge-restrict cycle, Stefanie never thought a full recovery was possible until it was. Through deep work on body image, the nervous system regulation, and rejecting diet culture, she found true healing and now supports others do the same. So if you've ever felt stuck in a cycle of food obsession or body shame, this conversation really is for you. Welcome, Stefanie.
Thank you. It was really nice to listen to that. It's like, wow, I did all that.
And that's why I do it, because I'm like, let them hear their own phrases. Like, how often do you get an intro like that?
Yeah, that feels so special. Thank you.
Well, you're doing really important work, which is why I wanted to get you on the podcast. I think, I definitely want to give you the opportunity to really introduce yourself to people who haven't heard yourself. But I know in my clinic, I see a lot of this, this obsession, this really, it's such a tense relationship with food. And I just really needed to get to a bit more of a holistic picture of that, because we know it's not about willpower, which we will totally unpack. But if people haven't heard of you before, Stefanie, please tell us about how you got to this very important kind of niche in terms of
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Well, I lived it. And this was really the impetus for becoming a coach and learning to specialize in it. So I developed, as adolescents do, right? Like a bit of an unhealthy relationship with food when I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, 13, but around the age of 14 and 15, I really started restricting my food, and my body was just slightly bigger than the other girls, right? So I was like, oh, this is a problem. I need to do something about that, and started dieting and running, and it morphed quickly into a version of anorexia, and then it became binge eating and bulimia, and eventually orthorexia. I dealt with my own symptoms of Lyme disease in my 30s. That was just another manifestation of the binge restrict cycle, essentially. And so until I was literally 40 years old, because on my 40th birthday, I started an all-in recovery process. But, for those 25 to 30 years, I mean, me and food were enemies and best friends at the same time.
Mm.
And I just didn't know how to exist in the world without relating my self-worth and my identity and my sense of center or not to food.
Mm.
So when I got out of that cycle, I just changed careers in order to be able to help other people do
Yeah.
this, because I know how paralyzing it is.
And it is like the sun for you. Like your life rotates around food. And I can speak to this as well, because I'm not always super open about this, but like that is very similar to my own story as well. I developed a binge eating disorder in my teens, which lasted about a decade. And what you were talking about it being this like love-hate relationship, and like, oh, it is such a horrendous mind
Yeah.
space to be in. And like I just, oh, we're going to unpack it all, but like I just really wanted to get you on there as well, because I was like, look, I've been through this and I've fortunately come out the other side as well. But when you're in it, it's a pretty dark and confusing place. And I wanted to kind of give people, I guess, those first steps are a bit more hope in terms of how they can start to overcome that. Because probably like you, I didn't necessarily feel like anyone was really talking about it, at least in a meaningful way, other than eat more veggies. And I was like, that's not the problem here.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the problem.
I think binge eating is the most misunderstood eating disorder.
Yeah.
And I never got anywhere
Mm.
because it was not that it was bad advice,
Yeah.
but it was very much focused on like controlling yourself. And
Yes.
that binge eating is seen as this like out of control gluttony kind of
Mm.
disorder.
Mm.
And it's actually rooted in scarcity.
Mm,
And it's trying to compensate for what is actually a very a scarce sense of like having enough.
yes.
So in order to heal the relationship with food, it's actually really countercultural and it's really counterintuitive and it's
Mm,
definitely counter what we hear. So the idea of like even just using like mindful eating practices or feeling your feelings, which is relevant. We can talk about that.
yes. Yeah.
But, that as the primary strategy just was not, it was almost like there was a barrier in front of it to be
Yeah.
able to do that. And I spent 30 years trying to find the key,
Mm,
to get that to actually work.
mm.
And what actually ended up happening was that I recovered through allowing myself, well, not just, but through allowing myself to actually eat more freely
Mm.
and let me explain what that means, and to reduce the amount of like shame and criticism that was going on. That's a very simplified way of putting it, but it was radical actually compared to
Mm.
what I had been doing for the years prior.
Yeah, wow. And like you said, it's about seeing, and when you were describing that kind of wall, that barrier, like I had like a visceral reaction. I'm like, I remember looking at that wall myself, so I totally understand that you're just like, right, what else is out there? This clearly can't be it. I can't be behind this barrier forever. But I want to, I guess, really, I guess, step back to maybe a bit more of a foundational understanding of this topic. People can often use, I guess, words interchangeably, like comfort eating, binge eating disorder, emotional eating. Like,
Mm.
is there a difference between them? Are they one of the same thing? Is it on a spectrum? Do we have to
Yeah.
make the distinction?
So they are different,
Mm,
and I do believe they're on a spectrum. And do we have to make the distinction? Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not.
mm,
I think that looking at the relationship with food without the stigma of the label is important because we can get bogged down in like what is and isn't. That tends to be a perfectionistic mindset too, and like,
mm.
am I sick enough to deserve to get
Yeah.
help here, or should I just be grateful that I'm only emotionally eating instead of just binge eating when it's a chronic issue that's causing a real quality of life issue.
Mm.
But is it? So I think about binge eating traditionally or in the DSM. Do you guys have the DSM?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. It's like, wait, is that an international thing or is that
Yeah.
just what we call it?
Yeah, we do.
I didn't know if you had a different name. So it's eating like, and it's a subjective measurement, right? Like be eating very large quantities of food beyond what an appropriate quote unquote amount of food
Mm.
would be considered in short amounts of time that's followed by an intense period of like guilt and shame. That's
Yeah.
traditionally like how it's seen as. But I've worked with people who what they're calling a binge is very different than somebody else would be calling a binge. The way that I
Mm.
used to binge was amounts of food that like I can talk about, but it was just incredible amounts of food.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody else might be thinking, when they eat 2 minutes, an extra slice of cake or something like that, that's a binge. That's not
Yeah.
actually a binge.
Yeah.
There is overeating and that exists on a spectrum, but binge eating is crosses a line into this kind of compulsion where you feel like you don't have control over it. And it's not just a matter of like, oh, I ate a little bit too much or I comfort ate a little bit too much. It becomes almost a pathology that can cause physical pain and deep emotional scarring as well, which is not to
Mm.
say that emotional eating can't,
Mm.
especially or chronic
Mm.
compulsive eating.
Mm.
But binge eating it's more than just what we think about as overeating.
For sure. And again, like thinking of like as you're talking, I'm, relating that to my own experiences. I guess most people will be when they're listening to this, they'll be like, am I the type that has an
Yeah.
extra bit of cake? Am I the one that, drives to the shop at 9 o'clock at night to kind of get their, I call it fix, or get what they need to soothe or just kind of whatever purpose that food is having for them. Like, they're going to be thinking, oh gosh, like where could I be on this? So, and I guess it's a point of, I guess, wanting people to reflect, and it's not judgment that we're having this conversation with. It is purely about, I guess, awareness and reflection and thinking about, is food controlling my life? Is
Yeah.
my life revolving around food and those
Yeah.
types of things?
Yeah, and how much is it distressing you? I think the amount of distress is so relevant, right? Like,
Mm,
is it something that's really bothering you and getting in the way of your day to day? I also think that just given the diet culture that we live in, I think that people who may not have binge eating disorder where it's happening frequently, it
yeah.
are having some binge episodes because there's so much restrictive mentality out there that it is causing these sort of rebellious or like the biologically rebellious episodes of eating and potentially even binging. And I think it's happening a lot more than we think, even if
Mhm.
it's not necessarily binge eating disorder where it's happening chronically, over
Yeah.
months and months.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense as well. So, can we talk about why people, and I guess keeping it, because we are talking about a spectrum, but it may be just speaking to binge eating, if unless they're all of the same causes, what are those deeper drivers and
Mm.
causes that we use food in this way, or I guess we have this relationship with food?
So I think about the causes as versions of restrictions, but not the way we classically talk about restrictions.
Hmm.
So I think about it through physical, mental, and emotional restrictions. Physical and mental restrictions are the ones we're most the most popular, I suppose. Like everybody knows what physical restriction is, right? We're talking about like, oh, when you're on a diet or we're restricting calories or we're not eating any carbs, or only eating in a certain time window. That those would be physical restrictions where we're actually decreasing the amount of food we're eating or the time we're allowed to eat it, or the types of foods that we're eating. And then that creates sort of the equal and opposite effect where then the binge becomes the rebound behavior.
Yeah.
But mental restriction is also, I think it's more potentially more insidious than the physical
Mm,
restriction. And most of the people I work with, in fact, I would say all of the people I work with, to some degree, have mental restriction going on, which is essentially feeling guilty. So you could be eating all day long and not restricting, quote unquote, one little bit, but the thoughts in the mind around I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad. Oh my gosh, I have to fix this. Oh my, that kind of stress going on is mental restriction, and that your brain perceives those thoughts as much as it does if it actually were to happen. Your brain is like ahead of the game. It's like, oh, we know where this goes. This means we're going to be restricting soon, or we might potentially restrict. There might be a famine coming. We're just going to cut to the chase and we're just going to get right to it. We're just going to hoard the food now, before she even has a chance to actually physically restrict it.
wow.
But the other emotional restriction is the other piece of this, and it's a little bit less talked about with binge eating. I think that there's a certain culture on social media that's caught on to the fact that like, yes, restrictions breed binge eating. But there's also a fair amount of people who are binge eating without necessarily physically or mentally restricting. And this is where trauma comes into play a lot. There's a really large cohort of people who are binge eating who have trauma in their
Mm,
past, and that's where the emotions or the emotional experience is too overwhelming of something
mm,
and just feeling is not safe in the body. And
mm.
food becomes the way that we restrict those emotions, so to speak. So it's not that the food gets restricted, it's that the emotions get restricted. They get pushed down. We don't want to feel them. We want to distract from them. We want to intellectualize out of them. And in so doing, we're stopping a physical process in the body because emotions live in the body.
Yeah.
So when the body it gets sort of overburdened by holding all of this energy that it's not allowed to release and process, food can be either the way it regulates down or the way that it just voices itself or pushes it back in another direction. So that's another place that we're seeing binge eating happening, in the absence of the actual food restrictions.
That makes so much sense. And when you were saying that, I was thinking about like a pendulum, like swinging, kind of like as you're going from like that restriction place, you're going into that consumption place. And I guess
Mm.
the emotion behind that, because it's not always physical. And I can see why it's more insidious and harder to pinpoint and understand if it's not someone physically saying, I don't want to eat food, or I'm not eating food, or I'm limiting calories. Like if it's from a space that's not physical, like that can be really hard for the
Yeah.
individual to realize.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love the concrete, and of course, it's easier to
Mhm.
understand what's in front of us.
Mm.
Whereas the mental processes going on here, the judgment, the shame. Shame is a huge driver of binge eating, and it also is a result of binge eating. Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways.
Yeah,
But with emotions too, like we can't necessarily look at that and say, "Oh yes, I can see that I'm suppressing my anger, and so I'm binging." Like we
100%.
don't know we're doing it. It's become part and parcel of how we're just living. And when you can't see something, you're not necessarily giving credit to what it's actually doing on a
Mm.
metaphysical level, which is
Mhm.
essentially what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I hope people that listen to that I guess again, it's about awareness. It's not about any like I don't expect people to be like, oh, it's again, you said it's the
Yeah.
anger I'm suppressing, but it's about, oh, hang on a second. Like, I know I eat, but I still, yeah, I get it. So what is actually happening when someone is binging? What is happening? Like, is there kind of any chemical processes, I guess the physical, the emotional, like
Mm.
what is happening in that process? I'm
Oh,
assuming a
there's so many
lot.
different things. Yeah. Well, it depends where it's coming from, but so I was so I did have this physical restriction going on at one time in my life that then turned into mental restriction and emotional restriction. But when I was restricting, it was a lot of the times I would kind of be on this roller coaster of like binging, and then I'd be like, okay, I have to get it together. And then I would have these days or sometimes weeks, so so who knows how long it would
Mm,
last, where I would just be good, right? Like, and I was like, okay, I must be a carb addict or a sugar addict because that's what I'm binging on. So I'm going to reduce, I'm going to get rid of all of that, and I just would eat like, fats and proteins
yeah.
and vegetables maybe. And I would do well, quote unquote, for a little
Mm,
while. And I would be like, oh, I finally got it together. And what happens in that, and not just with the carbs, but like ghrelin builds up, neuropeptide Y builds up. So there's having these hormones that have to do with hunger and fullness that are starting to
mm,
change. So the hunger hormone starts to like exponentially increase in the body. And this can happen just in the course of a day, by the way.
mm.
Whereas leptin, which is your fullness hormone, starts to go down. And then we're not feeling, the fullness cues aren't actually arriving. And then cortisol starts to go up if we do this chronically for a long time. And so when we binge, in many ways, what's happening is it's a response to these hormones that are getting imbalanced. And so the binge is actually like biologically appropriate, right? The binge isn't this personality defect.
Yeah.
It's a recall of biology to be like, we are getting completely out of whack. Our ghrelin's building up, our leptin's going down. We're getting like the cortisol is rising.
Mm,
Stress is here. We must be in trouble. We need to collect food. We
yeah.
need to get safe. So it's causing that to recalibrate. But then what happens is dopamine goes up. So we get the reward from that. And then that's reinforcing that this is rewarding. And then serotonin goes down, which is our pleasure hormone. And then we feel really low afterwards. So we've got all these different things going on. And honestly, I didn't even know any about this until after I recovered. So it's not like you have to figure all this
For
out in
sure.
order to heal.
Oh,
Like
for
I had
sure.
no idea until later.
Yeah.
But like there's a lot of processes that are going on that actually make sense from the
Totally.
viewpoint of what we're going through. And I think one of the hardest things about binge eating is that it feels like it makes no sense. You feel like you are acting against yourself in every way possible, like self-sabotage and like, why am I doing this to myself? I'm not even hungry. Why am I eating? But it actually does make sense when you look at what's going on in the hormones in the body. So those are some of the things that are going on in addition to the emotional landscape of
Yeah.
it.
And I think like hearing that, I mean, gosh, I would have killed for someone to have said that your body's actually behaving appropriately for what it's experiencing right now. Because it feels like a total hijack. Like you're just like, I've got zero control here and I'm at the mercy of
Yeah.
gosh knows what at the moment. But and I think about it the same in relation to my gut patients. Like, why am I in pain? Why am I doing this? And if you actually, and again, like you don't need to understand the science or the processes necessarily, but if you remember that the body kind of is behaving exactly how it should given what it's experiencing,
Yeah.
I guess you feel slightly less angry at your body. You're kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, you poor thing, how confusing for
Yes.
you.
I know. Exactly. It's a total like mind switch to be like, oh, you're the victim, not me.
Yeah, which I mean, gosh, we've got to have empathy for all parts of ourselves and a bit of
Yeah.
self-compassion. So if you, I guess, have that, I guess you now see that your body is trying its very best and it is acting in a way where it is built to be responding in those ways. Yeah, you're just like, oh, darling,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, as opposed to
Yes.
like,
And
me
yes.
down.
That was so game changing for me. And honestly, I think that was why I recovered because I started to understand that new voices were coming out on social media that were speaking to this a
Mm,
little bit. And I had never heard anything like that. And for the first time in my life, I was like, oh, it appealed to like the scientist in me, which I'm not a scientist, but I like science. I
yes.
like to know why something's happening. And that part of me was like, oh, that makes sense. And
Mm.
oh, in that case, like I have to look at this whole thing differently. And that was what got me to approach myself differently because until then, I was just basically berating myself for being a big jerk. Like I just thought I was just so lazy and lacked willpower and I was so weak.
Yep.
That's the only explanation that I had to offer myself.
Yep. Again, like I'm just nodding my head here, knowing how that feels. So
Yeah.
we've spoken about some of the hormones and, all of these very physiological and chemical processes that happen. I'm just wondering when it comes to people and how that affects our hunger cues, our fullness, and our satisfaction for people in this experiencing this, how do we start to understand what is hunger, what is fullness, what is satisfaction? How do they start to trust what they're feeling, especially knowing that there's these chemicals going all over the
Yeah.
place? Like, I guess that's a really difficult question for you to answer, but I'm putting it to you.
Well, okay. Well, the first thing I always say is if this is something that you struggle with,
Hmm.
you will not have access to regulated signs of hunger and fullness and satiation right off the bat. That's something to work towards.
Yep.
So a lot of clients that I work with will come in and say, "Okay, I'm doing everything that they say to do. I'm eating regular meals again and I'm eating the different food groups, but I still keep overeating and I
Yep.
still keep eating past fullness and I maybe they can feel hunger sometimes, but they certainly can't feel fullness.
Mm.
I always, there, and then it's like, well, see, this is why I'm broken. Like, this is why this doesn't work for me. I can't be intuitive with my eating, which, by the way, we don't
Mm.
have to do that, but we can talk about that. And so I always say, like, that's the end point. That's what you're working towards because your system is not regulated yet. It
Mm.
took me almost a year in recovery to actually get to a point where I could not only hear my fullness signals, but really respect them. So I
Mm.
would understand when I was getting full a little bit, but then I would just keep eating because the system wasn't regulated yet. And we have to also remember that it's not just physiology going on, it's psychology. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things at play. And so in order to establish and reach a point of regulated hunger and fullness cues and satiety, number one, there's time. There's a time factor. You have to like there's it's not going to happen right away. And second of all, to expect that we're going to have to get it wrong. It's going to be messy
Hmm.
before that occurs, and that can't deter you. Like because it can feel really discouraging to be like I'm doing the things, I'm eating the food, I'm not restricting, but this keeps happening to me.
Yeah.
And I think also to note that like what the culture tells us is normal eating oftentimes is not, and it's not enough. And I know that also with the clientele that you work with, like sometimes there's restrictions from a medical point of view,
Mm.
and that can complicate this because there might be like a really logical part of us that's like, I need to eat certain things or not eat certain things in order to be well. And that's
Yes.
completely valid. And yet there might be still a psychological part that's like, well, I'm feeling really restricted. And I'm feeling like
Yeah.
there's a lot of scarcity and I don't like that. And I don't care about logic because, we have these like inner child primal parts. And
Yeah.
that part might be working. So we've got these two parts of us that are completely in opposition to one another. And that takes time to work through because they both have to feel safe in order for this to all work out.
Yeah.
And safety takes time. So it's not an immediate process.
And I hope actually people hearing that find relief in hearing that because when there's this pressure that we have on ourselves to do things perfectly and do things right and do things once, and you're really giving them permission to be like, no, like it's
Yeah.
it's going to be a process and there's going to be whatever words you call it, you're going to be slip ups, you fall off the bandwagon, you go off the path, like whatever kind of way that you're thinking of it in your mind to be like, this is so fine because this is part of the process, and that your body is trying to recalibrate and try to
Yeah.
relearn after having months, years, decades of feeling and experiencing the opposite. So I actually hope people find a sense of peace and relief in that they don't
Yeah.
have to be perfect to do that. And in fact, nobody expects them to. And they kind of can't do that. So, you can't expect something that your body literally can't give you at this stage.
Yes. So I was diagnosed with Lyme disease in my
Mm.
30s, chronic Lyme disease. And so for 2 years, it took 2 years to get a diagnosis and I didn't know what was going on. And I thought I had autoimmune and I thought, I
Mm.
mean, I just was going from doctor to doctor. And for a long time, I used food. I was cutting the different kinds of foods. I was looking at gut health as like a part of what that my symptoms were related to. And so and this is pre-recovery, so
Yeah.
I was slashing food groups left and right. And because I hadn't yet worked on any of the mentality around that, I was going back and forth with binges like in one of the worst episodes of my entire life at that point. I mean, I was really restricting for medical reasons, but then having massive binges as a result. And that was going on and on and on and on. After recovery, I did actually recover without any restrictions at all, and I just kind of trusted the process. And I had to look again later at certain foods that might be irritating to me.
Mm,
And I did that really slowly. And
mm,
I did that and it was messy because I still had this part of me that was like afraid of these restrictions inside. And so I had to be patient with myself and I had to really help myself feel safe. Like I'm not doing this to take it away from me. I'm doing this to keep, but it still took a long time. Like it still just took
yeah.
time. And I am able now to eat in a way that nourishes me without any of this. It's been 6 years now that I've been recovered. So I've really worked towards that. But it is possible. And I want to say that because I meet a lot of people who feel like, is it possible for me to heal my relationship with food if you aren't supposed to restrict, but I have to restrict? How do you do this? And it
Yeah.
can be done.
Yeah. Oh, look, and I think as well, and like what you said, again, like I'm thinking of in my personal experience in my practice that I'm I'm very conscious having the history that I have to be like, there
Yeah.
you go on a low FODMAP diet or take out XYZ. That that's not always the way. Can we do things without that? What kind of supports and aids and processes do we need to feel? Because again, it's not about just taking out the food, it's about support. And deeper than that, I
Yeah.
always, talk to my patients about food is actually never the enemy even if we are pulling something out for symptom relief, like it is never the enemy and it is never long term if we
Yeah.
were to look at that. Because kind of like we're trying to listen to our body is trying to just give us a signal, and at the moment the food is triggering it. But yeah, I'm certainly probably taking a bit more of a holistic approach and not a you have to do this to get better approach, just because I know that like that can make people worse. And as we're talking about, there's such a big relationship with our nervous system and our physical body. We don't want to replace the issue with now, exacerbating that stress,
Yeah. Right.
anxiety, like we don't want to be like, here, you're not eating gluten, but now you've got severe food anxiety. Like that's
Right.
not a win.
It's not going to help.
No.
But it's so important that you're doing that because I think this is where the nervous system comes in too. Like food isn't ever just food, right? It's the relationships and the people that are delivering, these messages to us. And
Mm,
so when diet culture says you need to eat this way to be acceptable, right? That just reads as fear and shame and pressure.
yeah.
But when somebody like is nurturing, saying like, I want to help you feel well, and let's look at what these foods are doing, and also I'm gonna hold you through that with compassion, and like we're gonna be flexible, and I'm gonna meet you where you are, and also this is not to punish you or to make you conform,
Yeah.
and that delivery goes such a long way. And I'm not saying that it is 100% of the equation because there's
For
still the
sure.
scarcity inside.
Absolutely.
But having a voice deliver that message in the way you do is a completely different experience to the way that we're normally getting messages about restriction and what restriction is for. So
Yeah.
I think that that piece is like a nervous system regulator right there,
Mm,
is like having a safe person be naming this and saying, we're going to do that. We're doing this thing, but it's different than the way that you've
yeah.
traditionally probably done it.
Yeah. And like you said, there's other aspects that can obviously still come up around scarcity, and that's okay. And there may need to be additional support for that. And I want to, I guess, talk about some of those things where when we're talking about diet, we talk about things like intuitive eating and mindful eating and clean eating. And I guess these are words that people are hearing that want to be doing, that they're
Yeah.
putting as goals. What do you have to say about those types of words that are being used in social media and wherever else?
Yeah. So I think anything that's become big enough and
Mm.
become more of a household name, right? Like intuitive eating has become. Mindful eating is like this, I don't know. I get images of like doing yoga and eating raisins,
Yeah.
like chewing them 20 times. Um, and clean eating as well. Like clean eating was a huge buzzword during this time when I had Lyme disease, and that's how I ate. That was like the
Very
pinnacle and
clean. Yeah.
very clean. And they become forces of their own, right? So they start to depart from their original intention and they become like dogma or they
Yeah.
become like the way. And then you can
Mm,
do it right or you can do it wrong. And then they're like a set of rules. And I think that
yes.
even intuitive eating is sometimes becoming like that. And then perfectionism starts to creep in and now we're not really doing anything different than dieting like because it's still this like what am I supposed to do, you tell me what I'm supposed to do and I have to do it and if I don't
Yeah.
I fail.
Yeah.
And I think that there's room for like eating nutritiously and eating foods that make sense. And a lot of the foods I ate when I was dieting, I eat now, but I
Mm,
don't label it, right? So like,
mm.
or even intuitive eating is not something that I subscribe to as like a protocol. It's just,
Yes.
it happens to be aligned with how I ended up eating, but
Yeah.
it's not, it didn't come first. And I think that
Yeah.
when we've got something that comes first, we're getting away from our intuition actually, right? Like it's intuition with a lowercase I, or like
Yes.
it's not with the label on top. And I think that's part of the issue I have with these terms is that they
Yeah.
end up becoming prescriptions.
For sure. I know what you mean because there's no like one way to intuitively eat. The whole purpose is that it is, you know, a guidance that you get from within, which sure, if you're in the swings of binge eating, you're probably not necessarily going to be feeling and tapping into that intuition straight away. But
Right.
ultimately, like the diet that you feel best on will be one that comes from your intuition, but it's going to look different to anybody else that's out there because you are different to anybody else out there. I think I don't know what we can call that aside from lowercase
Yeah,
intuitive.
lowercase I. And then
So
that'll get corrupted.
yeah, yeah, I know. We're hoping not. And even like when you're talking it, and it's so true because I speak about in my clinic about, how do we eat with more intention? Because part of the issue I see, and again, this is occurs in binge eating where you're hardly chewing your food. You're just like,
Yeah.
more, more, more. There isn't that awareness of it. And so we want to bring in, I guess, those types of slower practices without it becoming rules. I think
Yeah.
that's like there's the fine line of like, yes, we need to be chewing our food because that's what we're supposed to be doing, but not to the point where you're like, I only chewed it 10 times or, like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such a fine balance.
I think for me anyway, it comes down to understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing, not just
Absolutely.
doing what I'm told to do. So
Yes.
this exact example of like slowing down, I used to binge so fast. I mean, the urgency was so high, but also so was the shame. So I was like mass consuming all this food like really quickly and really secretively and really shamefully. And when I talk to clients now about like slowing down, I always like caveat it because it's like not that kind of slowing down, like slow down and be mindful, because that to me just feels like, oh, that's just like, that's the way you should do it because the way you're doing it is shameful.
Mm,
It had to make sense. And so I talk about it like, okay, part of the reason that we want to slow down is because, and by the way, if you're physically restricting, that has to be met first because that urgency is just biological.
yeah.
But beyond that, a lot of why we're eating so fast is because we're eating with apology. Like we're eating like we're not supposed to be. It's a secret. It's a shame experience. So
Mm,
part of what the strategy here about slowing down is not for the sake of slowing down itself. It's actually for the sake of like when you're allowed to do something, when you're not ashamed of doing something, you're not urgently doing it. You're
mm,
just doing your whole system is more regulated. So you're like leaning back in your chair and you're like eating because you don't need to rush, you know what I mean? And so the energy of that is a part of the nervous system that we're trying to cultivate from like a psychological point of view of like trying to reinforce back to ourselves that we're not doing anything wrong.
yeah.
And so when I looked at it like that, it changed what I was doing. So it
Mm,
became less about like, okay, I should be eating slowly because that is what good people do, and
mhm.
more about, oh, okay, like I can try eating slowly because I have nothing to be sorry for. And that made a difference to me, just that mindset shift, because
Yep.
it made me feel like the purpose of what I was doing made a different kind of sense.
Oh, that
If that
makes
makes
so
sense.
much sense. Yeah, that like I'm just yep, yep, that lands. I get it. That makes total sense. And I think that is a penny dropping moment as well. Because I don't know, you think about other things you do in your life where you're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this or whatever it is. And you're doing it in a very scurried, hidden kind of way. And it's very quick. And it is about, yeah, like if you're eating there with if there's that permission to be like, this is totally fine to be eating this. All of a sudden you're relaxed, you
Yeah.
don't care who sees you, your whole posture changes. Like that makes total sense. So I guess for people who are dealing with that inner critic, that shame, that perfectionism, that guilt, like how do we start cultivating compassion? How do we start cultivating
Mm.
permission, acceptance? Like how do we start switching this
Yeah.
language?
So I was never like a gentle self-compassion kind of person. I didn't want to be gentle with myself in the beginning. So I actually started to access compassion through a little like no nonsense kind of practical know-how. Well, like I was speaking about earlier, when I started to understand just hormonally what was happening and
Mm,
biologically what was happening, learning, education, this piece was actually my inroad to
yes.
compassion because I started to be like, okay. Well, I'm not going to give you a big pat on the back, but it's apparently not your fault to the degree that you thought it was. So
Yep.
at least I could like take away some of the like harsh critic, even if I couldn't get behind the nurturing mother, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that was how I could do it. And I always say that education and really understanding the mechanisms that this why we're binging, why this is happening, is the inroad to compassion first.
Yep.
So that awareness piece, and I read a book, well, I read The Fuck It Diet by
Oh,
Caroline
oh
Dooner.
yes. Yep. Yep. I do know that book.
And that she explained a lot in there in a very like funny, relatable way that helped me understand things. And that's where I was like, oh, all right. And then it was just a matter of like, well, this is annoying and this is frustrating, but it's not my fault. That was the beginning. And then the rest became more like learning about how self-talk and listening to myself. Like I started listening to the way that I was talking up to myself about my own body,
Mm,
which was again, it was just like the way I talked to myself my entire life. So I didn't think much of it. But then
yeah.
I was getting dressed one day, or undressed, I should say, and I heard myself look down at my own body and go, ugh. And I
Oh,
heard myself, you know, and
yeah.
it occurred to me just because I was starting to pick apart the food stuff and starting to think about it more, and I was like, what? Oh, like that's what my body is hearing from me. Like that's bullying myself. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's so mean. And even though at the time I couldn't be kind, it was again, I was like, you know what? Just don't be mean. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to be overly nice. Just don't be mean. And so I would every time I would hear myself make that sound at myself, I would kind of pause and almost like rewind a little bit and be like, okay, like I don't like it, but like I'm not going to scoff at it. And
Mm,
that was how I started to do that. And then eventually that actually became a lot more self-compassion organically because I started to feel the impact of not being constantly berated inside my own head. And then when I would have those thoughts come back in, I'd be like, that doesn't feel good. That's not okay. Like you
yeah.
can't talk to yourself this way. So the contrast was really helpful just to take away the negativity.
And for many people, they're probably thinking that feels, it feels so disingenuous for me to be like, I'm going to go from full beratement to, aren't you like, oh, lovely,
Yeah.
mothering yourself? Like, they're just like, that's just too far of a step. So if it has to be through a route of a different way of understanding or awareness, or just like, I'm just going to be
Yeah.
less mean, like, I also think for people to hear that again, I'm trying to break down the barriers for people to thinking this is too hard. So, like, if we think about, I guess, making it in terms of micro goals or semi-achievable goals, I'm hoping people are hearing this thinking, oh, that sounds slightly more doable rather than
Yeah.
I'm going to start to like give myself
Yeah.
nightly hugs and,
Yeah,
great
I couldn't do
gymnast.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
So,
wouldn't have done that.
no, because there's too much self-hate there, or whatever it
Right.
was kind of carrying out. So I guess like with people hearing this, like what are some of the first steps that people can start doing that can do, I don't know what word to use, to start changing their relationship with food? What are some of those first steps?
So, like I said, education first. And I
Mm,
spent a really long time in not doing anything, but actually just learning. Because if I
mm,
had the pressure to learn it and then do it, I don't think I'd have done it. So I this is called the orienting. Like there's a part of the stress cycle that's just orienting to the problem in
yep.
the nervous system, right? So I spent months and months and months just reading about it, listening to podcasts about it, scrolling social media about it. I wasn't ready to take action. But it was almost like thinking about how I might take action or like what I would do maybe. And there were times in my head that I was like, absolutely not. There's no way I could get behind, binging and then not compensating for it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it because it was like, well, I'm just thinking about it. I don't have to do it. So I give a lot of credit to just immersing yourself in these kinds of conversations and people who are talking about these kinds of things. Because if you're not doing that intentionally, you are absolutely going to default into restrictive mentality.
Mm,
Like that is what's out there. That's what you're going to scroll past most. If you're not telling the algorithm what you want to see, you will find yourself being reinforced that you should be skipping meals and that you should be fasting and that you should be doing all these things that are going to just further enhance your restrictive and then
yeah.
your binge patterns. So giving some and intention to the awareness of these things, finding spaces that feel supportive
Mm.
online or on, and these things. And then from there, it would be, and it's going to be different for everybody, but one of the things with binge eating is that, and I know this is something it feels like it's unfair because other people who don't binge eat get to sort of get away with doing things differently. But if you are somebody who has binge eating, there is a certain amount of like regular eating that your body just needs to feel safe. And that means like having what I call anchor meals. So this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between. And I recovered on a like breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. And it was a 3 meals, 3 snacks approach. So I never was going more than 3 to 4 hours without eating. And if I hadn't done that, I would still be binging because the body was going into scarcity so quickly. And again,
Yes.
my neighbor doesn't need to do that. My sister didn't need to do that, but I needed to do that. And
Mm.
it's like this humility of the difference, right? Like of
Mhm.
understanding what your body needs versus other people. And that is the most, I think, of all the things, that regular eating is the most important when it comes to binging, especially if you're a restrictor.
Again, as I'm listening, I'm like, yep, what did I do? Like, as in, like, I'm reflecting on my own thing, but that makes sense, and that rings true to my experience as well. It was that regularity, and it was like just that assurance that I'm going to get food,
Yeah.
um, and I guess being okay with that. You might feel like you're eating more overall, but
Yeah.
like really, when you actually are, you're it's just about providing that sense of safety and like, body, don't worry, we've got a snack coming up in 2 hours,
Yeah.
like we're okay. And to do that for a period of time before there's that trust there, like I definitely think that's a really great tool and great thing to pass on to people, if they're not already doing that, is saying like snacks are actually okay, because there's obviously
Hmm.
lots of thoughts about like snacks are bad, and again it's just like this, just people talking bullshit because they can, and people just like
Yeah.
talking from their experience like it's God's word. Like, it's just their experience. What we need to be figuring out is like what is working for us. So
Yeah.
little intuitive with a little I, like this is where it's like we need to be figuring out, are snacks actually working for me? And it sounds like there's an absolute place for them.
Yes, yes, 100%. And the word safety is the key because essentially that's really what it is. Everything is about is creating safety in the body, whether this is, if you're emotionally restricting too, this would apply where the regular eating pattern isn't
Mm,
necessarily that part of the problem.
mm,
But the safety in the body, and this is where my nervous system work came in, is like paramount, right? Because what happened in binge eating, we've got a completely dysregulated sense of safety physically, like
yeah.
physiologically. There's just this feeling of scarcity that's causing the binges, and then also then mentally and emotionally that we're not safe with ourselves, we're not safe with our thoughts, we're not safe with our self-talk, we're not like our entire nervous system is on high alert all the time, like waiting for the other shoe to drop or waiting for the next like shame cycle. Like the whole goal here is to become more regulated and to
Yeah.
be able to have more access to your executive functioning
Hmm.
so that you're making choices and that you're able to like be grounded in yourself.
Mm,
And that comes, I think, in many ways from the physiological regulation of regular eating, the way you're talking to yourself, and then the way that you're also meeting your emotions, which I know we didn't really get much into here, but that's where that call to like, what is it like for me to start to experience emotions? What does that even mean? Like, I don't even know that I'm not, like, what am I pushing down? What am I not pushing down? So sometimes there's a call into like therapy or coaching or
yeah.
something to help look at like what are the patterns that we don't even know we're in when it comes to feeling. Um,
Yeah.
and how does that manifest in the body from an energetic perspective? Because emotions are their energy in the body.
Yeah. And I think that's where, we do need to, give ourselves the, I guess, I don't know if the word's permission, or just, I guess, understand that there are things that you're probably going to need to get help with, unpacking. It's the same for people with gut issues. They're like, what can I do with my diet? I'm like, I think we need to talk about the nervous system. And for me, it's a referral out. Like, I can give them basics, but like I'm not a somatic therapist,
Mm.
I'm not a counselor, I'm not working in those fields. And I think that's where our emotions and emotional state, for me, they always feel like the elephant in the room when we've got these, like, they
Yeah.
feed off each other, but they're a very big part that no
Yes.
amount of perfect eating or even timed eating can necessarily overcome. So I think when we've
Yes.
got that pronged approach, there is just so much. I see people get better, or I see them experience change so much quicker. I guess
Mm-hmm.
you're probably
Yes.
like,
Oh
yes,
my
yes, yes.
gosh. Yeah, I mean, that's why I became a somatic therapist because I mean, I was impacted by that when I started working with my own somatic therapist. Like, I mean, I was a therapy pro. I knew how to talk about everything and think about.
Yeah,
I love to think. It's my favorite. I
yeah,
love to intellectualize everything, and I
yeah.
always will stand by that. But there's only so much work you can do on emotions intellectually.
Yeah,
So it
yes.
was the first time that I started to work on what it even meant to have somebody go after like the feelings, the emotions in my body from this nervous system perspective. It's a completely different kind of therapy.
Mm.
And it was fascinating because my body was doing things and like my emotions were doing things in these sessions that my brain had nothing to do with, like
Yes.
nothing to do with. I would start talking about something and all of a sudden would find myself in a puddle of tears and I wasn't a crier.
Yeah,
Like I just and I had no idea like why it was even there. Like it
yeah.
wasn't even talking about the sad story. And it was just like the way it all actually works together is fascinating. And the way that the body stores emotion is fascinating. And the
Mm.
way you can pull it up is fascinating. And it's a titrated thing and it's very slow as well because it can be really overwhelming. But
Yeah.
it was, I don't think we look at emotions through the body. And that's newer. And I think that's where probably like, when I was growing up, that was just not, it was all intellectual. So that's a new piece, I think, of
Mm.
looking at how to process this stuff.
And I like, again, like I see it from my experience and with my patient's experience. I think you're right. And I can attest to that too. Like I can talk about my feelings and I can talk about these things and it makes sense and I understand and I can even tell you what I know I should be thinking, but it feels very differently in my body. And I've got this almost different system which is still feeling
Yeah,
semi-neglected. And that's kind of where the saying I'll totally butcher, but it's kind of like you can't work at a deeper, yeah, I'm not even going to try, but it's kind of like you need to work at the same level to where the issue is. And intellectualizing emotions is not working at the right level. Like it's a felt experience, not a thought kind of experience. And
yeah,
we need to, I think, just consider working with, that's not to say that you don't need talk therapy. Gosh, I mean, like,
right.
I love my therapist. But is there a place or is there room for other people? Like, absolutely, like they're potentially doing different things, your therapists. You may not be doing them at the same time. Like, I think it's about people thinking there's more than just talking about it, which can make a huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah, such
Yes.
as
I mean,
somatic
and
therapy.
I will always talk about it. Talking about is can do a lot actually.
Yeah,
But yeah, and you don't even with somatic therapy, it's like you don't even need to tell stories, for example. You don't need to go to like your trauma history
yeah.
necessarily. You can if that is feels healing to you. But it's more like how do you what happens is that the emotions almost the stress cycle of the emotions continues to live out in your day-to-day interactions. So like when you're getting road rage, like every single day, it's really not about the traffic. It's potentially about like stored anger, right? So
Yes.
and you can work that through by looking at what's happening in the here and now and helping
Mm,
that stress cycle complete in the body instead of having to reroute into a binge or
mm,
into a restriction and then a binge, right? So that's how the binges come into that is that they take over the energy that we don't otherwise know what to do with,
yeah.
because it has to get out somehow.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's overwhelming, so we're looking for that thing. There's so much that we've spoken about, and I mean, we could talk forever because it's personally, I like it's just so important to me, and I know for patients and that I work with and listeners, they're probably having these aha moments. But I want to kind of end on two questions. So the first question is, and I'll let you answer this. Okay, so what can somebody do today that's like, I'm feeling stuck, I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling really overwhelmed in this cycle that I've created myself? What can I start doing today to start helping, calming, nurturing myself?
Nurturing myself through the food angle or through the self angle? I think that might be the first thing to decide, actually. Do you mean the food piece?
Yeah, I mean, you can give both. Like, if someone's like, if it's through food or, yeah, give, I guess, for both for people that are like, I don't know what one.
Yeah, I don't know which one to pick. Well, one could feel safer than the other. And I could see it on both sides, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I'm always going to lean this way, but like the education piece, like I said, can be just listening, right? So I have a podcast. It's called Life After Diets. I am not the only one. There's plenty of podcasts out there that talk about these things. Just hearing some stories of
Mm,
of people who've been dealing with this and listening to that and letting that in and hearing just different perspectives, to me is what you give. It is a way of nourishing yourself because you are sometimes we'll have people write in and say like I thought I was the only one doing this, or like I thought that I thought that I was broke, this is such a secret, such a shameful thing. To hear other people saying, oh, this is a thing, lots of people are dealing with this, we're talking about it on a podcast and we're bearing it all, like, is such a relief.
yeah.
And that itself can change the energy in the nervous system. Like that is safety in the nervous system when we feel like we are connecting with somebody else, we are not alone, and somebody's got a path for this. Like
Mm,
that feeling is to me the biggest gift. Like that is where I would start if I were doing this all over again.
yep.
When it comes to the self and like what something somebody could do for themselves, I mean, I want to go too big with this because I'm like, oh, it's like the way we talk to ourselves, like we gotta
Yeah.
but this is potentially too big. So it's like I have this worksheet I give to people sometimes, which is just like an inventory sheet. And it's taking one day, like one 24-hour period, and being intentional about noticing like exactly like what you're hearing yourself say to yourself and then just jotting it down. Like you don't need to correct it or do anything like that, but just to be tracking like what are you saying to,
Mm,
whether it's after your meeting at work where, like, or after, you had an interaction with a friend, or even just alone in your room, or when whatever it might be, when you walk in your house and you're like, gosh, I'm this place, just to notice all the criticism that's actually going on, or all of the shoulds that are going on, and to just take an inventory of all of the things that the way you're actually speaking to yourself each day.
mm,
Because in 24 hours, I've had people come back and be like, I'm constantly like basically just either comparing myself to other people or talking about how I'm not measuring up and what I need to get done and what I need to be doing better, or
mm.
yelling at myself about how I look or how I eat. And that these things are basically taking up a lot of our mental space, or how I'm not a good
Yeah.
enough mom or whatever. Sometimes just taking a look at the inventory of your thoughts can like sort of shed some light on like, okay, like I might need to get some support in this area, or I might need to start like even just thinking about what I'm doing to myself.
Yeah. Again, I think with awareness, that's kind of where we can start to figure out what our next steps are. Because if you're thinking about them all the time, you don't even realize you're doing it, that you've created this incredibly hostile environment for yourself. And
Yeah.
it's only after, like you said, an exercise. And you might even do that. If it's not 24 hours, it might even be an hour, and you're probably surprised by that, where you're like, well, there
Yeah.
wasn't a positive thought in that whole hour. 24 hours
Yeah.
probably won't look much better. But it's again an awareness exercise, right? That's really helpful. And I guess my final question is, from your personal and professional experience in this area, if there is like one piece of advice or your biggest learning in in this whole journey and
Mm.
experience that you want people to know about, what would be that, I guess, that parting advice?
So I always feel like such a buzzkill when I say this. And it's never what people want to hear. But I am the biggest advocate of giving yourself so much time and space on this. This is not something that fixes itself in 3 months. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, this is not like and this whole idea, like this 3 week fix. I wanted to heal and I wanted to heal quickly. And if it wasn't happening quickly, I was over it. Like, I can't emphasize enough how much can change over a longer span of time. And when you don't have the pressure of needing to fix it quickly. I gave myself like
Mm,
a year to recover, and really like that just was the gift that kept on giving anyway. Like I learned much more in second year and third year. And when we're having that, like, I'm not better yet. Like then we're giving up and we're self-abandoning. And then
yes.
we're thinking it didn't work, but really we just quit in the middle. Like the time element here, it can be such a security blanket of knowing you do
Mm,
not need to rush this. You do not need to master intuitive eating or self-talk or self-compassion in even 6 months. Like
mm,
to just keep immersing yourself in these concepts that resonate.
Mm,
And that's it. Like just
mm.
to keep doing that, because when you think about how long it took to get here and how many years it took to instill the way we're talking to ourselves now and the way we're eating now, it doesn't go away in 6 months. Like it's going to take, it's not going to take the same amount of time to undo, but like it is going to take a significant amount. And so I just, that's something I feel really, really strongly about because I see so many people feeling so discouraged
Yeah.
quickly.
If someone is listening to this that doesn't have binge eating and they've got gut issues, being, I guess, more like gut podcast, that is incredible for them to listen to as well, because my thoughts, I echo that. I second that, where to give ourselves permission to heal in whatever time frame it takes, rather than a 6 week challenge or
Yes.
oh gosh, it just makes you feel terrible when you don't do it. But you're setting yourself up for failure, putting time restrictions on something which will take longer than that. So I think that permission to take time, again, like I know we all want to feel really good quickly,
Yeah.
but like it takes time. Like there's just no other way about it. And just to surrender to that and keep working through that and not to give up on yourself. Because yeah, I see this in my practice as well. People like, it doesn't
Mm.
work. And I'm like, it does, but you just stop too soon.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Keep going.
yeah, so there's so many things, and I think that's a lovely message of, again, permission to take time, permission for things to be rocky and not perfect, and permission for people to feel like they're on this, they're not, that they're going to be something that they commit to, and it doesn't have to be this, yeah, as I said, a perfection journey. I hope is
Hmm.
a message of comfort to them, and that they feel heard and seen, and that there's no pressure on them to do things perfectly quickly. So thank you, Stephanie. That was amazing. And with everything that you've shared. And if people want to learn more from you, work with you, just even, yeah, listen to some of these messages, because I think people probably need to hear more often. How do they do that?
So I have a podcast, actually I have two now. It's called the Life After Diets podcast. The other one is a different kind of self-help one. But I'm also on Instagram. I am Stefanie Michele. I am stephaniemichele.com. On my website, I have lots of stuff going on there. And I just started a Substack. I am Stefanie Michele. So if you search for that term, you'll find me.
We'll find one, Stephanie. Well, hopefully you're, but I will put all those links in the show notes, so that if anybody does want to, and I do encourage people to click on those links, because again, especially on that social media, we can see a lot of diet culture stuff. So to have someone in your feed that's peddling another message, one that is more inclusive, loving, not a bad thing. We can always use a bit more of that. Hopefully that will change
Yeah.
the algorithm as well. So I'll put the links
Yes.
there. Thank you again, Stephanie. This was just a wonderful, wonderful episode.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.